question for you tonight is, well, the first statement, politicians and business should be doing all they can to get us back to economic growth. That should be their first priority. Yes, absolutely no, somewhere in the middle. Where are you?
Come so far, feel so real.
I think the financial crisis showed us the tip of an iceberg, actually, and the crisis was a crisis of the system's own making. It arose out of, at least to my mind, a couple of factors. But perhaps the most important one was that over the last 20 years we've gone to extraordinary lengths to stimulate consumption growth in the economy by expanding the availability of credit and debt. It was called monetarism. It was a term to monetarism in the late 1980s, early 1990s. And it led to loss of control of the money supply. It led to the creation of massive personal and household debts that gradually become unstable, and it led to the creation of what became known as toxic derivatives, which were basically very complex ways of hiding the mess away from the balance sheet and passing out the liabilities in little chunked up measures in the most extraordinarily arcane system that you could imagine, that nobody could any longer fully understand or comprehend. And this was all done in the name of stimulating people to go on spending, whether that was good for them or not, whether it benefited them or not. And that's profoundly broken, and it seems to me in three or four specific ways. One in the sense that the system itself no longer knows how to maintain itself without getting into this kind of sophisticated wizardry around financial derivatives. That was an inevitable upshot of trying to push growth ever forwards. So it's broken in its own terms. It has failed systematically to relieve poverty where it most needs relieving, and the understanding that somehow you could grow the whole thing and lift everyone out of poverty simply failed. And perhaps most important of all, its implications, its material implications, and I barely need to say that here, are potentially catastrophic. We didn't see absolute meltdown in September 2008, but we might very well have done. And yet, I suppose the thing that I'd like to just put at the core of my "is it broken" is, does this system actually reflect us? And for quite a long time, I think we've kind of been sold a dupe. We've been sold an economic system which is supposed to reflect our best interests and our best nature. And actually, the more you think about this question, does it reflect us, the more you realise that what's been put at the heart of this model is at best a narrow part of what it means to be human. So to me, this agenda is as much about opening out our full potential as human beings as it is about any sense of restraint or constraining freedoms and possibilities. And it's that brokenness, I think ultimately that's the brokenness that motivates me most. We have been encouraged and persuaded into a position to accept a view of ourselves which is horrendously incomplete.
And the big chief execs of the banks have been up saying they didn't really understand the complexities of some of the instruments that they were pushing forward. But if they had understood them and had said, look, this is mad, they would have been out of the job within 24 hours. What we saw over the last 2 years with the credit crunch was the ginormous failure, almost catastrophic failure, of global financial systems, of global payment systems, that were too big to fail. And all the cuts that we're reading about that are being gloated over in Birmingham this week are all about bankers going into schools and hospitals with wheelbarrows to get the money to pay their bonuses. And so we haven't really learned that much.
And my view on it, my particular view on it, is that we've created so much debt, we've created so many virtual assets in the system that there's a disconnect between real assets land, buildings, companies, and virtual assets, all the bonds, stocks, CDOs, CDMs, all these arcane financial instruments that you refer to, Tim, that will never be bridged. And the reason that difference, which is something of the order of 10 to 20 times, so there's something like 500 to 1,000 trillion dollars worth of these virtual assets, and there's only about $50 trillion worth of real assets in the world.
None of the credit crunch really factored in any analysis I've seen, the loss of environmental resources, what we're pumping into the biosphere. All of these things could create all different kinds of the economy crashing, the economy falling over.
All this time waiting for who we are, where we're going to.
We just think there's one way to do things, that companies have to be organised as companies with external shareholders. Companies have to look like Tesco's or the like. But it's not really so. And I think we've got the seeds of all that economy around us. And what we need to do, what they need the water and nutrients to grow.
So what does it look like? It looks like hope to me. That's the smell and the scent and the feel of a new economy. And there is not one single vision. There is actually a multiplicity of different avenues. And we've, in a sense, what we've lost through the march of the existing system is those possibilities. In the same way that it's cut down our sense of who we are to some narrow model of individualistic consumerism in which well-being is pursued for private means through the accumulation of material goods, that very consumerist vision of who we are, that's narrowed us down to that. It's narrowed down our institutions into the things that support and frame that view of humanity. And to me, that quote that you read, Naresh, about prosperity, it fills me with horror when I hear people talking about prosperity and economic growth in the same breath. And when you ask people what matters, the answers that they give you sort of tell you how to construct it, it seems to me, are, yes, of course, economic security matters. So you have to try to get economic security back into the institutions. But the things that people talk about are home, family, health, relationships, the strength of their community, a sense of participation in the life of society, and a sense of meaning and purpose in their lives. And these are the institutions, these are the things around which we have to build supportive institutions.
Well, how do we transition from what we have now to something else? Because most people are employed somewhere and they're earning a wage, and it's going into a bank, it's going to the current financial institutions, there's pensions, there's all the things. So is it a matter of collapse? Is it going to collapse?
It could be that collapse is inevitable, but it does seem to me as though we should be doing everything we can to create not just resilience after collapse, but resilience to collapse. If you care more about the future than you do about the present, then you would actually accept zero rate of return on your capital. And you might still be encouraged to invest that money because it's providing for your own future security. So actually the vehicles that allow people to invest money as savings with zero or possibly even negative rates of return are still providing a service to people to create financial security. So I think there are various motivations that could make this work. One is one's own financial security into the future. The other is one's care and concern for the future over and above the present. And actually these are value orientations which you could think of as being entirely realistic.
all this time preparing for it. Come so far.
The picture that Stanley was painting, and that's the reason why we're having this discussion now, was incredibly bleak and worried an awful lot of people. And I really think that, we'd just really like to hear your angle on it. Hopefully you've got some sort of consoling words or something.
That kind of retreat to rural idyll in harmony with nature is going to be at a real premium. And I mean, the more I really have a lot of sympathy for people who have that view, but the more I think about it, the more I think actually, getting back and doing something about changing the systems and immersing yourself in political activism or grassroots change or whatever is really the right way to go. So, and that's not so much a consolation or a consoling word, it's more a kind of article of faith that there is, there's work to be done there, and the escape from it is not going to really protect you and your family for more than a few years. So it is about change. What is the crisis going to look like? I think it's probably going to look like the last one, but worse in a way, because none of the conditions have gone away. We still need growth structurally to keep the economy going. We've still got to persuade people to spend. In order to do that, we've still got to provide somehow access to the expanding kind of credit that led to the instability in the financial system. And then you look at one of the other underlying causes, which isn't talked about very much, but is very dramatic when you look at the numbers, is the rise in commodity prices. To be honest, I'm astonished that people are talking about recovery in those circumstances, because the basic foundations just aren't there. This is such a tenuous, frightening, fragile recovery that we have to be working on all those sectors. We have to be working on reforming investment. We have to be working on building local security. We have to be dematerialising the content of the goods and services we sell to each other, and we have to be thinking about Plan B, even if we accept with our politicians that we'd like to get the economy back on track. This has never been more important that we think about all of these conditions that would support resilience when the next crash happens.
Let me know when we get there, if we get there. Let me know when we get there.